Hello, folks. So we're on lesson 6 of our issue and debates topic, and we are looking at the ideographic versus nomothetic approach. Now, this is an interesting one. They asked a 8-mark question on this in the 2025 Unit 3 exam, which was done okay when we look at that feedback from examiners. So I want to cover this. They might do it in great depth. They might do it more of an application-based one. It's definitely one for us to make sure we are aware of. As we know, we need to cover all of these. We need to be able to do up to a 16 marker, but we also need to have enough understanding to apply any of these issues or debates, this is a debate, to those. So while we talk about these and explain these now, as we go through the rest of the learning and we go through the rest of the units and topics, it is relevant to point out that this has to be connected in, that we should be making these connections. We should be recognizing this. Okay, so let's go through. Let's look at the ideographic versus nomothetic. Well, first of all, let's just look at the terms. Ideographic. It's the individual focused approach. So when we look at that, we see that it refers to focusing in on the individual, so try and understand in depth that person. So research methods that are going to be used for this are normally like case studies or using some self-report methods, but very much with a focus on qualitative data. So for instance, they might have unstructured interviews being used here as well, because all these things are going to be leading to qualitative data, and it's about using that rich, deep understanding of the individual to understand the individual. Now, the humanists like Rogers and Maslow are big into supporting this. And so, for instance, we can look at client-centered therapy, which Rogers came up with, and he very much shows that by getting to know and understand and treat the individual, by understanding the individual, you can help that person to overcome the challenges in their lives. And so it's a great example of a truly ideographic approach being taken within the psychology discipline. So what we see then is the need to kind of see where it is in psychology. You know, some people will argue that it's kind of not using the scientific method, and humanists will even openly proclaim themselves to be anti the scientific method, which this can be criticized for that. Basically, because we're so focused on the individual and understanding the individual and being able to support and develop the individual, we can't really develop universally applied theories. So the ideographic approach will actually argue we shouldn't be trying to come up with large, big scale theories which then apply to everyone. Instead, we should understand the individual, study the individual for the purpose of working with that individual. Okay. Now, is the psychodynamic approach a ideographic approach? Look, I'm going to argue with you here that it's not. And the reason for that is, although the psychodynamic approach does use case studies like Little Hands and Anna O, what it does not do is keep it focused on those individuals. Instead, it comes up with universal theories, which it says applies to absolutely every single human being ever born. That is not ideographic. So while we can see case studies and use of case studies can be considered there, it is not truly ideographic. What I will, however, point out is that case studies can also be useful in wider elements in psychology. So, for instance, we could look at the case study of HM or Clive Waring, and we can see how, or KF, sorry, we can see how those case studies, by virtue of demonstrating that there's actually something wrong with the existing theory, they can help inform us that actually we need to revise an existing theory. So they can be indicative, so that they can indicate where we should maybe do further research on those things there. But if you're taking a purely not ideographic approach, you'd say that all those theories are always going to be wrong because there's always the exceptional individual, and they'll argue that all individuals are exceptional. When we then move on to look at the nomothetic approach, that is the opposite. Now, nearly all of psychology that you've studied and will study will come under the form of nomothetic. Okay, now nom, or that norm, you heard of that? A norm, establishing norms, general ways of doing things, ideas about how we should do things, general laws, theories. That's what nomothetic is about. It's about attempting to create theories we can generalize to everybody. So again, we can use every single overarching theory that has been produced in psychology ever. Any research study you choose to use that's got multiple participants, which then apply the findings to other people, that is always nomothetic. And this has been used many, many times. This idea of collecting evidence and then extrapolating it beyond the original target population and allowing it to produce theories which are around the area, which can help us understand beyond the original conditions and participants. So let's use a great example of Milgram. Milgram used his obedience studies to understand why people obey, and then he went back and said, well, actually, I think the reason that the people in the Second World War did those awful things was because of the situation they were placed in. He'd also go on to argue for Zimbardo will also go on to argue for Abu Ghraib prison that the reason the prisoners committed the horrific acts that they did in Abu Ghraib prison, and why Zimbardo could explain it, was because of his study which he did, the very famous Stanford prison experiment, which I've probably mentioned to you. It's no longer spec, but I've probably mentioned it to you as the most unethical study that has been done in psychology. Okay, so but the idea is that these things come up with generalized theories. We could use Baddeley, we could use Bowlby, we could use any of those big names from that Unit 1, for instance, to help us to demonstrate that principle. They tend to focus more on the use of experiments, and then we test theories and revise theories and work forward and go forward and work through and do those things there. That is very much the way in which it is done and which we work through. When we look at this, we see that the biological, the cognitive, and behaviors are all nomothetic in their nature. Why is that, though? Why do you think they are? Okay, so yeah, of course, all of them are basing their theories upon research studies they've collected, normally quantitative data, numerical data for, and then extrapolated from the findings to create a theory and then applied it beyond the original participants. Okay, this is what we think was the main way of doing things in psychology, but it's not the only way. And actually, there's a good argument that we shouldn't just do one or the other of these. Okay, we should actually balance up, but I'll cover that a little bit more a little bit later on. Let's go through and look at the three generalizable types of laws. Okay, so Radford and Kirby, now they talk about the idea that there's three types of laws that are being produced by research in line with the nomothetic approach. So they talk about, first of all, the idea of classifying groups, which has caused a hell of a lot of problems in both psychology but also the world. The idea of it being able to classify people is so problematic so many times. When we look at schizophrenia, you're going to see how big an issue that is. It is a nightmare. It is a minefield of events on there. So it's really, really problematic. We also have establishing principles of behavior, so general laws, which can be applied to all. Again, when we look at it, that's that bit an issue, isn't it? Because the problem we have is that every time we have a generalizable theory or law or those things there, what we end up with is some people don't do as we predict. So that might be something which we want to come back on, we will reflect on in a minute as a problem. And then also establishing dimensions. So the idea of continuums, continuums upon which people can be placed. So we might have emotional stability. We might have mathematical ability. We might have level of empathy. We might have level of morality, social competence, all those sorts of things we might have on a continuum in which we recognize different people there. We have locus control. That's actually a continuum. It's not, although we talk about being internal and external, Rotter himself recognized there was a continuum, not just two ends on there. He recognized later on as well that it's actually a continuum that it spreads out over that. Anyway, so Radford and Kirby points out there tend to be three types of general laws suggested by research. So let's look at the arguments for and against each of these explanations, because they are challenging on there. I've got the notes here for you, but I would also encourage you to go through and use the textbook. While I've written it out, it might be that you pick up a different way of placing these or framing these, which just helps you to understand it more or to retain it more. I would argue that notes which you write out tend to stick in your head better than ones which you just read through later than that. So there is definitely a point to writing them out, although obviously we have a limited time to get through everything. So I do provide PowerPoints as well for future reference and make things easier for you. But yeah, let's have a look then at the evaluation points that are being offered here. Okay, so first of all, let's look at the support for the ideographic, which is this is our one focus on the individual. So as I say, this is only a tiny amount of research which is done is really going to ever be ideographic on there due to the limitations of its methodology. So the case for it, well, ideographic is useful. Unique cases. So we've got Henry Molliston, we've got a case of Genie, got Clive Waring. All of those approaches have actually ended up changing the area which they are in. So taking an ideographic approach enables each psychologist working with them to spend time truly getting to know the area or someone who has those conditions and those problems. And by doing so, it has enabled us to gain an insight of that particular area that's greater than we've ever had anywhere else. Okay, so that's kind of more important in some ways than others. And for instance, the ability for us to say, yes, okay, there is definite clear support for the working memory model, but there's also definite problems with it, and we can use Clive Waring to demonstrate that. That's really quite significant. That's a major thing, and so yeah, Clive Waring, that helps us. It's the idea that they can be like either help us to realize where there's a problem because it doesn't work with this theory, or they can actually help us start a new area. So it might be that using an initially ideographic approach is beneficial, but then we could switch on to a nomothetic, yeah, using combination. Anyway, case study, case against this. Let's talk about that. So the case against the ideographic approach is that how can I put this? It's it's just not very scientific. Um, when we try to generalize from people such as Jeannie, such as Clive Waring, we have the issue that just comes back again and again and again, that they are not representative. When we look at other studies, such as Michael Rutter's ERA study, England Romanian Adoption Study, by Michael Rutter, we can see that again that can be much more interesting and informative than a large sample. But even there, it's still fairly ideographic, and it shows a fairly limited group of people, which may not be useful for other people. So it might be that actually a lot of the findings and a lot of the information that's coming out of an ideographic pieces of research is of very little relevance to the wider world. And so that could also be seen as a problem there. Moving on to then the nomothetic one, we have that the vast majority of psychology is nomothetic. Quote, any theory here, please. But also, we can see that these theoretical models have led us to do things like, I'll use the example of understanding learning difficulties here. Yeah, so we can now understand learning difficulties, and we can create effective support for people with things like dyslexia, dyscalculia, or ASD, ADD, etc. We can work around and we can try and help people on there rather than just thinking, oh, they're thick and in the back of the class. We understand this now. I know my dad's generation, literally, if you were dyslexic, you were viewed as thick. My generation, it was, oh, you're the exception, and we'll do what we can to get on those, but you know, it was getting better. Your generation, we have a lot of people who know a lot about it. The way in which they're taught, the way in which they're supported, makes people much more able to cope when done right, and that's because of psychology. We understand things, and using this nomothetic approach, it's beneficial. And I've deliberately avoided using the medical one there because the medical one's an easy one. So I've gone for a slightly harder one. But we could also talk about biological treatments and interventions, all of which have helped many people. Check out Sansone, 70% with Sansone and Sansone. Love it. OCD, it rhymes, it's easy. We've got it there. It's super useful. Sansone, 70% effectiveness with antidepressants. It even sticks in my memory. I've not even looked at that. Sansone, 70% of OCD patients showed improvement. That is a massive help, and that shows you that nomothetic treatments, nomothetic theories, which treatments have been based upon, work to help a large amount of people. But then on the opposite, we can always point out that we never, ever, ever get 100%. No, we never get that 100% statistic. We never get that one correlation. We never get that perfect sign up. And actually, if we did, it would be considered really weird. In fact, if you remember, Gottsman, or you haven't heard yet, but you will hear, Gottsman and Shields come up with the highest percentage I have ever found as a psychology teacher and student, which was 91% concordance rate. But even in that, it shows us that there's a 9% of something else. And these studies, which come up with these generalizable theories that try to manhandle everyone into this generic box that says, oh, we're going to explain you like this. This is the way you are. This is why you're going to do this. This is how you're going to think. This is how you're going to act. All these things there will make you completely predictable. Oh, you've done something weird. That doesn't work with our expectations. So we're just going to quietly ignore you and say the majority do and show that we're mostly right. But the problem is we are still minority wrong. You know what can be helpful to use in this situation? The ideographic approach. If we use an ideographic approach to find out why that 9% didn't? Why that 35% didn't? We can look at those and find a more detailed, a more nuanced understanding. And so the argument that I would put to you is, and that I'd recommend you to be recommending at the end of any essay on the nomothetic approach, they do seem to like quite a lot. I would argue that we should not see the ideographic and nomothetic as two contradictory ways of researching. We should actually see them as two complementary ways. That if we use ideographic approach to check theories work and find that sometimes they do that, great. If we find, however, they don't within individual cases, it might help us to progress bigger theories. But equally, when we come across those rare examples that aren't explained, it can be useful to get an understanding in a deep way and then step it up and go forward on to the next part. And that would really, really help us, would help us progress on there and enable us to understand people better. So maybe we need to stop drawing this distinction and reframe this debate, just like we need to reframe the nature-nurture debate. We need to reframe the ideographic versus nomothetic as ideographic and nomothetic, saying that we should apply it to people in the individual as well as looking at them in the general on there. So yeah, as I say, to me, this is kind of a pointless debate because I do feel that we should be using both. But if you want to argue with me differently, please drop me a line. Drop me an email on there. Happy to do so. What we have first then is, okay, so this is the first task, the debatable presentation task. What you are doing is working with either independently or with one other person. I want you to create a little presentation upon a debate or issue that we have covered. Please try, if there's loads of you, try and cover different ones so we can then all share back and help each other out. Or you could work through this and do it, and it just help and share on there. So the idea here is you look at least 3 areas of the course, applying a different debate to each, applying your understanding of the issues and debates to that area. You're going into detail about that, how that two sides of the debate fit into the area. For example, you may choose to look at the holistic versus reductionist debate when considering research into conformity, such as Ash's study, thinking about how well each theory in the area provides an explanation for different points of view. So this task is designed to take you about 3 hours. So take your time and think things through. What I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to develop your applicability, your application skills of these debates. And by doing so, I'm helping you to really be able to use those these debates in a different context. So this will actually be really beneficial to you, both generally as a skill, but also in your 3 exams. Okay, so that's the idea. So you need to go into detail. You need to be as precise as these examples are. That may use an exam, and that really shows you understand the issue or debate. Okay, you need to create this on a Google Doc, preferably. That way I can see it, share it with me so I can see what you're doing on those, and we can also share those out quite quickly as well. Okay, you could start this now, or you could go for an alternative activity, but if you pick the alternative activity, you will no longer be able to change your mind. So I'm going to say pause the video in a second and decide it's a class. If you choose to hear the second or third task, then you can no longer come back to this task. It's a very good task. I would recommend you do it. Hence, I've written it down here. However, it's up to you. Do you wish to do the debatable presentation? Decide now. Okay, at this point, I have to decide or feel that you've moved on. So let's quickly go for the next one. The next one is it's Quizlet or Kahoot, but I've not made them. I just never got around to it. It's just a thing. So you know what? I want you to do it. So working in pairs, you need to create either a Quizlet set or Kahoot quiz to help yourself and or others revise this area. So this one is again going to take you a while to do. You're going to find out how long it takes to do these things, because ultimately, you know, nice was away, doing it well takes time. So what I do is either crack on with that now, and again, maximum 3 hours on that. Obviously, some of which you're going to be working outside of the lesson. But I'd like you to have a go at doing that now, or you can, for a final time, risk it for a biscuit and go on to the final possible activity. Your choice. Choose now. Okay, so you have decided to go to the final task. That is your choice, but there is no going back. You've picked this now. Okay, so for each of the hypotheses, create a detailed plan for how you would conduct research, ensuring to create all the tools that you need to conduct your research, considering any issues or problems that may occur and how you might overcome them. Oh, and don't forget your ethics too. First of all, children playing in the playground designed for their gender will be significantly happier than children playing in the wrong gender room. I think that's some drilling next door to me. That was some review data. There will be a significant correlation between the food eaten at lunchtime and the level of aggression shown during lunch and the level of concentration in final lessons of the day. How would you plan that? How would you make that work? It's up to you. Work it through. And people's memory will be significantly affected by strong emotions, with longer lasting emotions often having strong emotional significance than other memories which fade rapidly. So you need to plan these out. If you got to this point, then you have nowhere else to go. Please have a go and complete this task. Okay, the idea of these is that I'm giving you in-depth work to work through on there. You can spend an hour in the lesson and spend 2 hours separately then doing this. All three of these tasks are genuinely beneficial. So I would recommend you go through and do each of them. However, as part of the lesson, I'm requiring you to do one of them. Okay, so thank you very much, folks. I will see you in our next lesson. Take care.